for any big model like a GPT 4.5 or anyone, the way it works is for 6 months, generally they process the data.
Yeah.
They scrape the data from legal and illegal sources both,
yeah.
and then they scrape and they remove all the personally identifiable information, and then they have to spend a lot of time, as you said, separating the signal from the noise.
Yeah.
And now that part has become even more difficult because people are using AI to add more noise, right?
Yeah.
And so the needle becomes even more difficult to find. They hire people who are experts in their fields to create high quality question answer data set. And so that part of training is something OpenAI came up with, and it is called reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF. Hello, this is Ashutosh Upadhyay, and we are honored to have Mr. Nandagopal Rajan in conversation with us. Mr. Rajan is the COO of Indian Express Digital, and he has an illustrious experience of 15 plus years in tech journalism. He also hosts a podcast, Our Own Devices, which is a weekly deep dive into tech and the industry-leading leaders that define it. So, Mr. Rajan, it's very nice to have you on conversation with us.
Yeah, my pleasure, completely.
So, I think I want to start with, after you graduated from IIMC, I think the first experience you had was with Hindustan Times.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that experience and what you learned from it that you apply till date?
I got placed on campus. Okay, I was from Kerala and I was going to Punjab. Okay, and again, this is soon after terrorism had just sort of died down in Punjab. This is year 2000. Y2K had just happened, right? So I had no clue what I was getting into. But HT was a huge learning experience for me because I would say most of my all my strong suits come from what I learned there, right? Why? Because I went and joined a place which was starting afresh, right? So it was almost like working in a startup because I was in the launch team of a new edition. And Hindustan Times doesn't do things in small measure, which meant we were in a huge campus where the press was also in the same building, right? Which became a huge advantage because I can tell you with a lot of confidence that most print journalists don't understand how the paper is printed, right? So that slight that you have to figure out, I could figure out how this is all done and I could use it to my advantage, right? So if your deadline is at 10:30, if you understand printing, how printing is done, especially how color printing is done, you could stretch it by 45 minutes. Right, so you could use understanding technology. So which is where I thought that journalists generally don't want to sort of get into any of that. So there is this entire thing in journalism like church and state, right? Journalists are not supposed to understand the business. Journalists are not supposed to understand the technology. Journalists are not supposed to understand anything other than their journalism, which I think has turned out to be a big disadvantage for journalism across the world. Right? How you get to the reader, the distribution mechanism, you understand the business behind journalism. It is a huge advantage for you because then you also start optimizing for that. I don't think there is anything wrong in that. So again, printing has changed, for instance, drastically in the 25 years that I've been a journalist.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of other things are still the same. People don't understand, why do newspapers publish early in the morning, right? That is a 400-year-old technology, right? That news cycle is 400 years old. It was done in a certain way because that is how printing was developed 400 years back. In fact, in one of the news conferences last year, I actually met the editors and people from a German publisher who's been publishing for 400 years, right? And they right now have the most modern outlook on how they need to tackle the new challenges, right?
Yeah.
But we don't understand that we are still stuck to a lot of those things, right? So now look at it in a different way. Maybe 6 a.m. is not the best time to read a newspaper, right? Why would you want to know about the news first thing in the morning, It is just muscle memory which is being carried over from generation to generation to generation, right? Now with the advent of new devices, that is changing, People are reading when they want. They're not reading when the news vendor or the newspaper vendor is going to throw the paper on your doorstep because of a 400-year-old legacy, right? So a lot of those, so understanding that printing cycle, that it takes so many hours to print, that is why it is printed in the dead of the night. Like, those kind of things. Now you understand that, hey, we are not actually solving a problem here, right? We are creating a problem which we are living, So,
Yes.
so that understanding. And again, it was a very complex news operation in Hindustan Times those days, because we used to have, if I remember rightly, about 8 editions. Starting from Jammu, Chandigarh used to service Jammu also, right? So, like if you're servicing Jammu, you need to release the paper so many hours before, so that it can be taken by road to Jammu from Chandigarh. So that's about 8 hours. By like if you understand how news, how the press vehicles drive, they drive crazy fast. So even then used to take 8 hours in those days, right? So then you reverse calculate. You have to have the newspaper in Jammu by 4:30 a.m. in the morning, right? So reverse calculate. The paper has to be done by a certain time. Now look at it. So in a different way, I'm a very unpopular opinion, but everything in your newspaper is technically yesterday's news.
Yeah.
Right? When we are in a situation where, like, when a story breaks, within seconds you have it on your Twitter feed. Within seconds you have people doing an Instagram live from there or a Facebook live from there. In such a situation, you're going to read things after 24 hours. Slightly awkward, yeah. So, but understanding how the entire printing function works, I think has been a huge advantage for me. It happened only because I worked in an organization where the press and the newsroom were in the same building, which is very, very rare these days, right? Because newsrooms are usually in very urban settings, and the press, you cannot really afford to put such a big setup in the middle of a city.
That's
right?
true. That's
true. So yeah, but that's been a huge advantage for me.
That's actually quite a revealing insight, and I'm glad you touched upon that, because that is one thing that I was very curious about, that how you manage these different roles, because as you mentioned, the segregation between church and state, and thou shalt not cross those borders. Yes. I completely agree with you. That has led to a big loss in these organizations' credibility or whatever. They've lost a lot to sort of new guys, right? And in terms of that, I am very curious as to what you think about alternate models of journalism.
Yeah.
Something like a News Laundry or something like the Ken, which I think they publish like business news on a subscription basis. And they were like, in 5 days of a week, we'll send you one news a day. And so what do you think about that? Do you think, I'm very curious to see your perspective on what that is.
Yeah, so internet, lets you get into all those spaces, right? Like if you want, Substack, for instance, right?
Yes.
A lot of journalists have sort of retired from their original role and moved into I will service my audience via Substack kind of a thing, right? So Substack, if you look at it in a different way, is an evolved version of the podcast.
Yes.
So the podcast, the blog post.
The blog post.
The blog post has evolved into a newsletter, and the newsletter has become a paid newsletter catering to a very niche audience, right? Now, that is the evolution. But that is possible only because of the internet, right? And if you look at it in a different way, the original newspaper business, right? It was completely dependent on the masthead. The masthead is all that mattered, right? Bylines never mattered. Like, bylines also became a little bit more prevalent only in the 90s and 2000s. Even before that, like, you would often see generic bylines, like, from our correspondent, Express News Service, those kind of things. You wouldn't have the byline. Byline comes only when you have that kind of a story, right? Very rare. What TV has done is that TV has taken, made the byline even more prominent, right? You watch a show because of the anchor, right? I'm not saying that's a good thing. Yeah. But now what online has done is that it has made the byline the product, right? And it started about 15-20 years back with all these bloggers coming in. There were some very prominent bloggers, especially in the tech space and all, like, if you followed Apple, Daring Fireball, all of that has evolved into a thing where you can actually create a product around it, right? In the tech space, for instance, globally, there are a few big names, right, who have emerged from a very traditional setup and now become, standalone products, like Kara Swisher, right? maybe the most powerful podcast in the tech space, right? She has so many things around her. I was listening to some podcast where her valuation was put at about $30 million. Single, just her product, right? And in the news space, you have seen in India, in the US, right? So many of these people who have emerged as, all of that is, I think, possible because of that, in a way, peer-to-peer streaming ability, be it the internet, be it email, be it YouTube, you can do that, which was not possible in the first, let's say, 400 years of the news business, which was primarily in a broadcast kind of a mode, right? You would prepare the same thing for everybody, which is what Doordarshan used to do, which is what most of the TV channels do, right? But now that model itself is withering away. So all these new things are possible because you can cater to a niche, make the niche very happy, and be profitable on it, right?
Yeah.
Not very easy. You have to be very good with your product.
So with that, and running off of what you said earlier, I see a constant thread of you being connected to technology.
Yeah.
And while at the same time being connected to the basic underlying journalistic principles that are mostly should be constant, at least should be, right? Yeah. So with that in mind, how have you seen, because you have had like first-hand view of these offices, of these editorial meetings, have they changed, and how so? So compared to like a print newspaper, what kind of conversations were you having? What was the sort of framework with which you selected stories?
Yeah.
Because also technology was the barrier also, because there was only so much space you could fit in, right?
Yeah.
And now that is not the case.
Yeah.
And so, and if I remember correctly, I think you said in a previous interview of yours that I think Indian Express posts 350 stories a day.
Yeah.
So how do you see the difference? How do you see the sine wave going in this direction?
Yeah.
Just go through that, please.
So I think the news meetings have changed primarily on two things. One is, I think, little bit of data coming in. Right? So if you look at print business overall, right, you don't have a lot of feedback mechanism from the other side, right? You don't understand, okay, you put a great story on the front page. Are people actually reading it? You're assuming that people are reading it because it's on the front page, right? The same story goes online and you suddenly see it's not that well read as you thought it would be. Right? Your earlier feedback mechanism was somebody maybe sending you a letter or somebody meeting you or calling you and saying great story, or even the opposite, right? That's your only feedback. But now what the same story online gives you is that it gives you the feedback of every single person via analytics, right? It tells you X number of people reading it. So many people are reading X paragraphs. So many people are reading it via these sources, be it Facebook or be it a distribution partner like a Daily Hunt or whatever, right? You're getting all that data. And suddenly you realize that it's not what you thought it used to be, right? Now this data has started sort of influencing news meetings. Maybe, it is, in a lot of the international newsrooms, I would say meetings are held around data, right? In India, in our kind of a setup, it's mostly data is informing the news meeting, right? Then you take your own decisions based on that. The other thing where I have seen a big transition is that 25 years ago, the meetings would primarily be around what is the news of the day that we need to put in the paper, right? Now it's moved towards what are the things that we have that nobody else knows that we are going to put in tomorrow's paper. Right? That exclusivity, because there is such a over delivery of news through all the mechanisms and everything. If you are going to say that same story again, it doesn't have a lot of value, right? So even if it's a big story, we need to have a specific angle to it, right? And Express does that very well.
Yes. So because the reason why I feel you are the perfect person to answer these questions is that under your leadership, your organization received 2 awards for a newsletter, for your newsletter as well as for your subscription model, right? So piggybacking off of that and what you just said right now, I want to go over your intro in your TED Talk, which I found really interesting. And it's really nice and slightly creepy, and I'll just go over everything. And
it is very creepy.
And it's and I want your thoughts on it.
Yeah.
So you started with I am an online editor and I know a lot about you. I know what you are really reading. I know I know that you like Bollywood more. I know you like cricket more. I know that you have a fascination for crime. I know you don't read serious stuff. I also know how long you read. I know a lot of you lose interest after 300 words. And you went on, and then you mentioned something very curious that if I, as a reader, cross 800 words, then I'm more likely to read as long as I want to.
Yeah.
But there's this gray area between 300 and
Yes.
800 words. Can you please talk about that and how you look at it
Yeah.
from a data perspective?
So it's not my understanding. This is
Yeah.
something that I picked up in a Google News Labs meeting that I attended, I think in Seoul 2016 or 2015. And this is basically curating data from Google Analytics across the world, which is why it was so mind blowing, right? Because you understand the kind of data Google is sitting on. Nobody else has.
Exactly.
Especially about publisher, because everybody uses Google Analytics as your primary data set, right? I think this would have changed quite a bit, because this is almost 10 years old, right?
Yeah.
Now, in 2016, the primary difference, I'd say, 2016, I would think we would have been sitting about 55% mobile access of content. Now we are at 91, 92, 93%, right? Or almost 100% access is via mobile.
Yeah.
Mobile changes a lot of behavior, right? So, but I still stand by it. Now, the very interesting thing here is about this thing, when you study journalism, you're taught about something called the inverted pyramid, right? The inverted pyramid means you put your most important things on top.
Okay.
Then you taper down on the less important things. If you look at this, if you try and implement this 300 to 800 word, the drop off zone into that actually converts into the inverted pyramid. You put your most important things on top, then you lead the reader to something, and then you hold them, right? Now, and I think this is the skill that journalists need to develop, right? You have data, then you are using your understanding of journalism to convert that data into an actionable thing, right? Which I don't think there isn't enough appreciation of, because we think of data as something very adversarial, right? I was doing this, I was so good at this, now data is saying I'm wrong, right? You are not taking inputs from the data and saying, hey, how can I take insights from the data and convert it into things, right?
Yeah.
So there is a lot of data out there now which you never had before, right? And the data suddenly shows a lot of things in good light, a lot of things in bad light.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean it's good or bad. That means there is of course a scope for improvement, right? Even with things, the data tells you there is scope for improvement.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's the important part. On the creepy aspect of it, right? Like, which is the analytics, like that, so now there are, I maybe spoke about the positive part of the data, right? The negative part of what I said, that I know so much about you, is that you get into your own bubble, right?
Yeah.
Now you start servicing that analytics. I will do only what people are reading. My stories will be only as long as they read, right? I will so that becomes a very, very problematic thing, right? Then you are sort of recreating your own version of the social media bubble in a way, right? You will pander to the reader. So again, with a lot of evolution of how I've been thinking about this and everything, I think the best way to do this, and I think this is what Express does very well online also, is to do a mix of what people want to read and what people should be reading, right? And of course, what people want to read will be what funds your business in a way, because it will have much more reach and all of that. That is what funds what people should be reading. Right? 2014 Financial Times had this front page editorial on how it was changing its vision and everything. It had this one line which I think is even now the best way to describe how online journalism should look at how it functions, is that the worst will fund the best. Right? Now, when FT is also talking about a worst, it doesn't mean that it's going to do a lot of really bad stuff, right? It is a relative thing. For them, they also do some things. Maybe Financial Times doing a story on Trump's statements might be the worst.
Yeah.
but it will get them a lot of traction, and that is what gives them the muscle power to invest in a lot of journalism that takes a lot of effort, time, and money. Right, I think that should be how you balance it, right? In India, for instance, there is this funda about ABCD in internet. I don't know if you've heard about it. A, astrology. B, Bollywood. C, cricket. D, devotion. This is what people consume primarily, right? And if you look at it, this is what TV does.
Yeah.
This is what a lot of the problem is if you only end up doing this, only end up doing these ABCD things, right? Now this I learned from Anand Goenka, who is the owner of Indian Express. Yeah. Like the moment the first week of me joining Express is when he told me about this, and it is true. It is even now, it is even now the holy grail of how internet works in India, right? Maybe B has become a little bit more of C, as in not cricket, cinema as a whole, because I think Bollywood is sort of losing its charm a little bit, right?
Exactly.
Because it's now become more about pan-India cinema, right?
Yeah.
Cricket also, I think, though it's been overdone, so people are it's not that kind of an interest where 25 years ago when Sachin was going out to bat, you would see a spike. I think that's not there anymore.
That's actually really fascinating insight. What I felt was, and what I wanted to ask you about is, how do you see the younger part of your readership? How do you see their consumption patterns? Are they consuming, even if they're consuming the important stuff?
Yeah.
Would they prefer to consume it in a visual format compared to a textual only format? Yeah. So how do you see that progressing, and how do you sort of, because Indian Express has shorts, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you sort of cater to that? How do you think about that?
Yeah. In fact, it's good that you mentioned shorts. Just this week, we won an award for shorts, as it has an AI layer to it. The first draft of the shorts is made using AI, and we have got an award for a great newsroom, use of AI. And again, it's completely editorially cleared. AI just gives you the first draft. It has to be editorially cleared. Now, shorts was where we were thinking we need to do something for the younger people.
Yeah.
Right? How do we woo them, right? So we have a problem of plenty, about 350 articles, right? Nobody reads more than 10-15 articles a day. Nobody, as in maybe people even in the newsroom are not reading more than that on any given day. But can you give, so I call it like the expressway, Can I put them on an expressway, which is like your Facebook feed, tuck, tuck, tuck. You can consume, you can glance through a lot of stories and stop where you want. Right? That was the idea. And it does really well on that front. Right? What it does is it gives them 8x the number of pages per session compared to a regular user. Again, very fleeting, but still it gives you the satisfaction, which is very similar to what you get in a newspaper of having seen a lot of headlines.
Yeah.
You don't read almost any of these stories, right? But you're seeing all the headlines. You're glancing through. At least you can say, I know about it. Right? You haven't read the story. Right? But it gives you that kind of a satisfaction, which is what a lot of people want. A lot of the consumption is superficial.
Yes.
Right? It caters to that. Now, how do we cater to the younger readers, right? We are a serious paper. Even the way we do entertainment and all slightly not, is serious compared to others. So I look at the younger readers into different brackets, right? Like, I have a 13-year-old who doesn't read at all, consumes a lot of content, but doesn't read.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe people just a little bit more older than him, 15 and all, are maybe keeping themselves, abreast with the news, maybe primarily on Instagram, right? So if you see Indian Express Instagram is primarily meant for the younger readers. So if you want to consume the top stories of the day or the stories that only Express has, you come to our Instagram feed and you should be sorted. That's how we look at the Instagram feed, right? That's the first level, right? Then if you're able to get them onto the site, then you have something like a shorts which lets you consume in a little bit more detail, right? And then you also have a lot of this content being converted into video now, again with very express standards, so that if you want to consume it in a video format, you have that. If you're good at audio, the best stories are also converted into audio, right? We are one of the first adopters of podcasts in India with something called Express Audio, right? Where it's a deep dive. We are saying these 3 stories, we are telling you what's happened, why you should be really bothered about these 3 stories or these topics or these conversations. So it takes you on a slightly different way. So that is how we do how we cater to the younger audience. That said, see, India's population, 50% or 60% is young.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think news organizations really take them seriously. right? So we are doing all these formats and all these things to cater to them. But are the topics really what they are discussing? I don't think so, right? See, I think even more so now, a lot of the serious topics like government and politics and all of that have sort of, I think the youngsters are feeling that it's not relevant to them. Because it's not changing their lives. They, if you talk to younger people, you would see a lot of conversation about, let's say, AI, for instance, technology, because that's something they use daily. That's something they know is going to impact their lives. Or climate change, because I meet a lot of youngsters who are really worried that, 50 years down the line, I'm going to be still here. I don't know what kind of a furnace I'm going to be living in, right?
Exactly.
So, but we are maybe not tackling it from that perspective enough, right? So, which is where I think newsrooms across India, across the world, have to have a lot more younger people taking calls on what is relevant. Maybe not taking, see, experience is very important in news on, understanding what not to do, right? But what are the topics? I think they need to have a little bit more say in some of this stuff.
Going off of that, something that I found very profound is when Jon Stewart, at the peak of his popularity, he was talking about his perspective on news media. And at that point of time, especially in the West, the two main channels, the Fox News on the right and MSNBC on the left, they had a very clear editorial stance, and they knew it and they pushed it, and everybody knew it, right? And they weren't shy about it. And so his point was that 24-hour news channel was made for one thing, 9/11 or something like 26/11 here. In the absence of that, to your point, how do we make content that actually serves society at large, also the interest of the organization, because it needs to stay afloat? So had you been in charge of a 24-hour news channel, what are the sort of decisions that you would make? How do you think about that?
I have to start with the disclaimer. I have not watched live television for 10 years. Since 2014, I have not watched live television. Why? Because every time I switch on TV, it is a master class in what we journalists have been told not to do. Everything we have been told in journalism school, thou shalt not, is what TV does, right? That said, I don't think India has 24-hour news. I don't think India has a news channel right now. Great business opportunity, come in, give a news channel. We don't have news channels. We have talk shows and we have entertainment, infotainment, all of this. We don't have a news channel. Like, you mentioned MSNBC. Almost every day I watch MSNBC on YouTube, right? You watch for half an hour, it just gives you one news after the other. They also have talk shows and everything. They are in compartments, right? News is not talk showized. Right?
Yes.
They're telling you there is a forest fire, there is a traffic jam. And in America, like for instance, news is very, I think, still very user-centric. Right? I guess you have been in the US. The day starts by telling you weather, traffic, those kind of basic things which really impact the user. Right? So having news at a slightly hyper-local level, I would not say hyper-local, but a local level, catering to that audience, I don't know why India still doesn't have it. Right? If I want to, so everybody in the US, for instance, is switching on radio or TV to figure out what kind of a jam I'm going to run into on my way to office. Right? We don't have that kind of TV. Right? We don't have TV that covers it from a very consumer-centric angle. Right? And then they will just, also it's become a very interesting business model in TV news to say this is my story of the day. And 24 hours I'm going to run this on loop. Which means you're not spending money on news. News is very expensive business, right? You're not sending people to 10 different places where you have to gather the right news, right? You will do news that suits you, which is easier to do. It is the cheapest to get 10 people into your studio and put them into these dabbas and just run a show, right? It is the cheapest. It's very tough to go to something happening in the Northeast and cover it, right? That is still a challenge. Even with all the technology, getting the footage from there to here is something that will make you sweat even now, right? We do a lot of shoots, in remote places. You have to actually come back with the footage.
Yeah.
Even now, it's not easy to upload a 4K footage from anywhere, so in that sense, we're still not doing, See, I think if I had that opportunity, I would still think of a very plain vanilla news, right?
Yes.
So one of the basics of journalism is that you report, right? You don't get into opinion. So if you see Express, for instance, opinion is in a specially marked
Column.
container or page, right? If it's online, it's in an opinion website, opinion section,
Yeah.
opinion pages. In TV, you can't make out when opinion is coming and going, right? And that's the biggest disservice, if you ask me, that bloggers did to the world. Right?
Interesting.
Right. Bloggers brought in this thing, that you would just opine about everything,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Everything
yes.
was opinion. You did not know anything about what you were talking.
And people gravitated towards the
Yeah.
opinion they liked.
Yeah. So people did not understand it was, again, opinion. It is one person's perspective. I'm not saying it's wrong, but maybe that's not the fact.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
In all of this, to have this factual news reporting, which is what journalism is supposed to be, has sort of gone away, especially in India, right? Maybe the closest we have to that is still Doordarshan.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is a very sad thing to say.
Yes.
Right? With all these big media conglomerates, with all their money, there is very little news out there.
Exactly to your point, because when I was studying for the UPSC, Doordarshan's YouTube channel's content is something I would actually watch, and it would, because they would have actual foreign service officers talking about foreign policy, and that was like really high signal discussions, right? And that is but to your point about the 10 people in a dabba and talking about, you'll see the same 10 people in another dabba in half an hour, and then usi dabbe mein, and then they'll just keep on, they just play this musical chairs, and it's the same people. They're friends. And so it's
and
really,
they're paid to talk.
They're paid to talk. And so they'll basically be at each other's throats, and then right after the camera stops, they'll be like, oh, okay, then chalo chai peene chalte hain, ye sab karke. But to your point, and just going off of the points you were saying, I feel what sort of vacuum there was that our current situation led to in the market, I think that vacuum was being filled by news, sort of citizen journalism. And that is something you mentioned in your TED Talk. And so again, now in the age of social media, where citizen journalists are where most journalists are also trying to build their own online audience, right? Just so they have a better, the better sort of negotiation position. How do you think about what the responsibilities of a citizen journalist or how do you think credible organizations such as yours, with the legacy that is so huge, how do you think about citizen journalism?
Okay, I don't think we are in the social media era anymore. We are in the post-social era. So I think social is dead, right?
Interesting. Please expand on that.
I think social media is dead. Social media, as we knew it, I'm from the Orkut generation. I loved how Orkut connected me with all my friends after 5-6 years of leaving college and all of that, right? We are in the post-social thing. We are in social consumption kind of, because if you see, you're not really socializing on any of the platforms anymore. You're just consuming, right? Many years ago, when Mark Zuckerberg made this call that Facebook is going to become a video-led platform, I think that was the start of it, right? So we have gone into that thing, accelerated by TikTok, and now everybody's doing shorts, reels, all of that. I'm not saying it's bad, it's great content, people love it. It's taking people away from TV, which might be a good thing, right? So, but I think people are not socializing on social anymore, right? Those conversations are happening in close groups. I was talking to somebody very senior at Instagram yesterday, and I have a 13-year-old, who should not be on Instagram, but we know but they don't post. Very few of them post, but they're all discussing things via Instagram and all of those chats and everything. So social has become very inward looking. The socializing part is not out there for consumption. We used to enjoy how people are fighting on their Facebook feeds, and it doesn't happen anymore, right? Except on Twitter. Twitter is all about fighting, right? But Twitter is also very superficial, right?
Extremely.
Actual people are very rarely talking there,
True.
Because, you would see great conversation, but then you are not sure whether this person is an actual person. Right? The only social media that is sort of left standing is maybe LinkedIn. And that's, and thankfully, it's not a free-for-all kind of a place, right? It's very niche, and the algorithm also works in such a way that it doesn't give unnecessary traction to things. But I think we are in the post-social world, right? In that sense. So also the citizen journalism thing, I think the bubble burst about 5 years back. Right. So citizen journalism thing was maybe 2012, 13 when it was, everybody tried to figure it out. What people didn't figure out was that if citizen journalism happens at scale, let's say you get 500 stories or videos in a day, which are all good.
Yeah.
How do you process it? Right? How do you authenticate it? How do you verify it? Right? And how do you publish it? And publishing things at scale is not always great, right? Because it can kill your YouTube page, it can kill your website, it can do a lot of things, right? And verifying is very important. It's come from a citizen journalist. You as a legacy media organization publishing it without verification, legal implications are yours.
Yes.
Because the person who you thought sent it to you might turn out to be nobody. Right? No, you will not be able to trace that person. So citizen journalism, I think, has died, its death. Right?
That's actually, I'm very fascinated by your thoughts on that. And so I want to jump now to a topic that sort of connects to everything we were talking about. Because, so I'll just give people some primer on, there are 3 pillars that AI needed to be built. There's a reason it was ChatGPT came out in 2022 and not before. The actual paper, the algorithm paper came out in 2017. But what we needed was data. So the 3 pillars of AI is data, compute and algorithms. So the algorithm more or less was figured out in 2017 in a paper released by Google DeepMind. And then social media, just because we have Web 2.0, where people were just amount of data, amount of images people post on Instagram is enormous, right? And so AI needed that amount of data. And no matter what any AI companies say, they're all trained on each other's data. You can't make a video model without scraping YouTube at all, right? So with that in mind, as the COO of Indian Express Digital, where you put so much content out there and you have such a huge backlog, such a huge catalog of stuff, right? How do you think about when, let's say, the next person is going to ask a question about something, let's say you published about, right? And so ChatGPT is going to take Indian Express's link and synthesize the information and present it to them. How do you think about that in terms of both sort of verifiability? How do you think of that in terms of, are there new financial models that you guys are thinking about? So just, I would like to have your insights on that.
See, I think from a publisher perspective, it's still a very evolving space, right? But we know for sure, as you said, that a lot of maybe all the models have somewhere been trained on our data, right? So if, let's say, any AI model is looking at great understanding of the Indian market, they would have scraped Indian Express, right? They would have scraped the Times of India. They would have scraped the Hindustan Times, right? So all that's happened. Now, so the good thing is we know we haven't put anything out there that will, be factually wrong. But it's if you look at AI in a different way, what does AI do, right? I'm getting a little bit philosophical here, and again, it's not my original thinking. I heard a version of this from an author called Byron Rees, who has written a book, and so look at it in a way. So this is this one thing, one technology which is sort of. If you don't look at it from a technology perspective, it is the collective intelligence of humanity, right?
Yes.
And you look at your phone sort of having this plug to this, enormous cloud of intelligence, which humanity has built over millions of years, right? And technically, AI is very close to that because maybe it's read through every piece of written word out there.
Yes.
Maybe, and I don't know, maybe 60%, 70%. It's going to do that.
Most of it.
It's read through most of it, right? It knows a lot of stuff which no human has ever known, right? And also this, the word you use, right? It synthesizes it, right? Let's say something that was written in Arabia 1,000 years back, mixed with what was being discussed at the same time in India in Sanskrit, coming together, which was never happened before, right? Gives you a completely different understanding of the world. It gives you a completely different understanding of history. It gives you a completely different understanding of your future, right? So, if you look at it that way, this is really mind-blowing stuff, right? Now, apply the same thing on... So, Express is one of the oldest websites in India, right? we have, I think, archives from 1997 onwards. 1997 to 2025. Let's talk about one story which was relevant in 1997 and is still being discussed. I don't want to get into whatever. It's very difficult for Express to understand what is the thread of that story throughout.
True.
Right? But AI has understood it in that way. It has taken it out of Express. Maybe Express still has it. Another model can train itself and figure that out.
Yes.
But it's taken that thing out. It's like taking, the word, it's like taking the zat out of something, right? It's like taking the soul out of something.
Yes.
Is there a copyright on that? We don't know,
yes.
Right? But it's a very, very tough thing, So many years of Express journalists' work and effort and all of that has gone into that. And there is no credit for that, right?
Yes.
Because it might put a link when it's giving a very specific data point. But when its intelligence is attributed to so much work that's gone in, there is no credit. Where do you know all this?
Yes.
How have you synthesized this information? And maybe that information is also not purely from one source like an Express. It's mixed with something else.
Yes.
Right? But there is no credit, right? So you've taken that soul. It's good in a way, but what happens to all the effort that's gone in? Right? So we need to have these ground rules on how do we navigate this space, which is still not there. Right?
Yes.
Which is where we said, how do you monetize it? How do people get credit, or how do the sources get paid for something?
Yes.
All of this needs to be defined. It can't be it's out there for free, right? Because then there is no point in us putting in so much effort. Let any of these companies do it. Now, why should we get into it then?
Yes.
Right. So that is the problem. Right? But all said and done, it is also giving a lot of value for places where you have invested in journalism, right? AI models don't want to train themselves on really superficial, hollow content,
Yes.
which internet is full of.
True.
Right? So like an organization like Express that really invested in journalism over decades is finding its value now. Right? And a lot of these, what we call traffic farms, which is basically there just for Google eyeballs, they have no value there because they don't have the depth that is needed for AI. Right? So for instance, a lot of publishers who jumped into the AI bandwagon by trying to create content have been penalized.
Yes.
Because all the guys who are using this AI is saying, boss, we don't want more and more AI generated content to come in and train more AI. Because that then becomes a vicious cycle, right? So, wherever they are seeing content that's getting penalized in a different way. So somewhere the good part of it is that I think there is not going to be a lot of space for very hollow journalism, right? There will be a lot of good journalism, and the superficial stuff will all happen on AI.
That's
right?
Yeah.
Because see, the superficial stuff is all what sadly most people need.
Yes.
They just want to quickly glance through something and understand, okay, what's happening here. They don't want to go into the depth. There will be maybe 25% people who will do an in-depth thing. They will have to come to the publishers.
Yes.
Yeah.
So because the way the economics of AI works and the economics of training a model, because that's something I've been fascinated with. And to your point, you're completely right. Because I was just a tech enthusiast, and it was only after AI came out that I learned to code and turned it into something that actually makes money for me, right?
Yeah.
And so that possibility came out just because AI was there. Otherwise, coding was such a huge, insurmountable challenge, right?
Yeah.
And so I really tried to dive deep into how these models are trained, how the economics works. And so for any big model like a GPT 4.5 or anyone, the way it works is for 6 months, generally they process the data.
Yeah.
They scrape the data from legal and illegal sources both, and then they scrape and they remove all the personally identifiable information, and then they have to spend a lot of time, as you said, separating the signal from the noise. And now that part has become even more difficult because people are using AI to add more noise, right? And so the needle becomes even more difficult to find. After that, 6 months is training the model for the first, which is called pre-training. You build the foundation model, and then after 6 months, and that's where, to your point that you just mentioned, that genuine experts are going to be even more valued. They hire people who are experts in their fields to create high quality question answer data set.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that part of training is something OpenAI came up with, and it is called reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes if you ask ChatGPT a question, it might give you two answers,
Yeah.
and it asks you to rate the best one. They need you to tell it what is high.
Yeah.
So yeah, because that is a feedback loop of data that any AI, because as an AI builder, I know I need that all the time. And so one thing that happened, talking about how millennials actually use AI, is we were tasked with building this like CA student revision system, where you would just enter the topic and it would extract the content around that topic from the syllabus textbooks, and then it would ask you a question, you would answer it, and then it would grade your answers and tell you how you're actually supposed to. The problem was people were only answering in 4 words. What is accounting? They would just they would not like to write long answers on their mobile phones, right? And so that is something that we had to that we couldn't really solve for. And so it's very fascinating where both AI, the way of capturing user data, because data is really insightful. I also heard you mention somewhere that that you personalize nudges for people. Just so, like if I'm really interested in AI, anytime AI news comes out, the Indian Express app will nudge me in that direction. So this is how I feel somewhere good and bad usage of AI and personalization will go. How do you see it panning out 5-10 years in the future? Maybe let's say the models become really good, 10 times much better. How do you see it panning out? Do you see some sort of, because I know it's shifting sands right now. What is your general sense of it?
I don't know how it's panning out tomorrow. So let's not talk about 10 years down the line, because see the way it's changing, right? Like literally, every other day there is a new thing that's being added, right? Like, and it could be on ChatGPT, it could be on Perplexity. It's changing so fast that you really don't know where it's headed, right? And I think it will come to a point where these updates, sort of slow down. It hits a smartphone kind of phase where it's like we've done everything. Now we are now in the consolidation stage. That could be 2-3 years down the line. Because you are in this phase where you're constantly, then you would also see, like, there is this huge of everybody wants to get into the AI game, right? I don't think there is space for enough of those people, because again, the kind of investment that's needed, the kind of scale you need in the back end, not everybody can. You can't take tokens from ChatGPT and create a complete, a complete product that will then scale up into becoming $1 billion business. I don't think so. Right. So there is a lot of a lot of churn is going to happen. A lot of, at least on the company side, there'll be a few players, very strong players left standing, right? So till then, I don't really want to hazard a guess on how that's going to change, right? But where it has real value, I think people have taken the very easy route on how to use AI, right? So if you're a publisher, let's make content. If you're a video guy, again, let's make content. There are a lot of other problems that AI can solve for you, right? So let's say from a publisher side, which is something I have been really thinking, why hasn't really, people thought about it, right? What's our biggest problem? Our problem is not really quality of content. We, for instance, like quality of content is something we do, quite well. Our problem is a problem of plenty. We have too much content and too many readers, right? If we are able to solve that problem, like Express gets, on a bad day, gets 2 million readers. Okay. We have about 350 articles. How do I ensure that each of those 2 million readers are able to see the articles that are relevant to them? I solve that problem, my business goes up many X. Right? Right now, it doesn't happen. If we do 350 articles, this is not an Express problem. Anybody who does articles, a lot of stories at scale, discovery is there only for a part of it. A lot of the other things doesn't get discovered. But the people who really would have read those stories are maybe there on your platform, because your scale of audience is also very high, but you're not connecting the dots. So this is maybe personalization at scale, personalization at a user level, That's maybe the kind of problems we should be thinking about, instead of thinking ki chalo content banate, right? Which is maybe the last thing you should be thinking about, right? Like as a publisher, like so let's say you are a corporate who really bad at content, Make content with AI. Of course, that's what it's made for, right? A publisher is really bad. Most publishers really bad. Really bad at marketing.
Yes.
We should do all our marketing using AI, right? Because so use it for things that you're not good at, right? Why would you want to start with things that makes gives you your very existence? Because that I say quote unquote is buying your death on Amazon, right? So I think there has to be that perception change on what do you use it for, right? And then this also gives you the kind of opportunities which were never possible. But I don't think enough thought is going into each industry thinking about what are the pathways AI is opening for me.
That's actually, that's brilliant, to be honest. So we're towards the tail end of our conversation. So there's just the last two things that I want to ask you.
Yeah.
And one of them is, how, as a person who's been closely connected to the tech industry, has been an integral part of it, what sort of advice would you have for somebody like me who is from a tier 2 city, who's trying to make it big, who has his own startup? How do you want, in general, the Indian startup scene, or the Indian, even younger people than me, the innovators, how do you see them in the global AI race? How do you want it to pan out? What would be your message to them?
So, 2-3 things, right? When India was making, people don't realize, one of the largest smartphone factories in the world is in India. But we have always had one of the largest mobile phone factories, which was in Chennai, which was a Nokia factory, right? When Nokia was at its peak, the biggest production house of Nokia used to be in India, right? There was a reason behind that. A lot of what Nokia was learning from India was relevant to rest of the world, especially in Latin America, in Africa, in parts of Asia, which covers most of the world when you're talking about from a population perspective, right? So if we are able to solve Indian problems, right, you suddenly solve problems for maybe 75% of the world or 75% of the population, right? But having covered tech in India also, startups in India also for so many years, rarely do I find that thinking. This is like, boss, America has made a great product. I will do it at a fraction of the price in Noida. Right? That is the basic thinking, right? Which has worked for a lot of people, but it is not going to give you a sustainable product. It's not going to give you a company that's going to last 100 years. You last 100 years if you end up creating a product that solves a human problem. And there are enough problems in a market like India that you need to solve. But there is not enough thinking happening in that space, right? And what you think is a very silly problem might be your biggest business opportunity, right? And if you look at it, a lot of things that we have done very successfully, are things maybe were not great business opportunities, right? Why would you get into a business where you are helping somebody to buy a cup of tea for 10 rupees with a digital payment?
True.
That is maybe India's biggest gift to the world.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But why don't, so there are so many such problems at scale, Look at the problem of language, for instance, right? We don't look at it, we are thinking, how do we make more people learn? But you don't really need to do that. You can, the AI can, for instance, be the unifier from a language perspective, right?
Yes.
I am a multilingual person, right? I, for instance, think ChatGPT does the best translations I have ever seen. Okay, and I've used translation, all sorts of things, all sorts of products, and it doesn't translate. That's the beauty of it. It understands what does a sentence mean in English.
Yes.
How does this sentence manifest itself in a Malayalam or a Tamil? If you do a translation, it reads horrible in the other language, right? So it has understood that there is this, I think, concept is called bhavarth. It understands the bhavarth of the sentence and brings it to the other language, right? Which could be very different from a sentence structure perspective, right?
Exactly.
So those kind of problems, if you are able to solve, we then think of, let's say you solve language at scale in India, right? Just look at content. Okay, let's take a very small Indian language like a Santali. Doesn't have any content. Literally doesn't have any content which is available online. But potentially tomorrow you can have the entire world's content available in Santali. Right? You do this for every language, bottom up. Right? Suddenly any education, any knowledge is available in all Indian languages, and by that function, all global languages. Right? You don't have to wait for an Apple or a Google to say, now the OS is also available in Hindi. Right? Right? And experiments on this side have happened in India before. Like, there was this OS called Indus OS, which used to, in one of its versions, used to give you, like, you get a message in English. And if you set up your phone in Gujarati, you do a swipe on the text and it'll give you a translate. But you can actually do things really well in in this space. I'm just giving one example. But there are so many very genuine Indian problems which can be solved, right? I remember one of the AI companies that I spoke to a few years back, Suki.ai, which again is in the healthcare space, right? Just say you are in a tier 3 city, anywhere in India. You don't have a great doctor. You have taken an X-ray. You don't know whether this X-ray needs to be taken to a big doctor or a specialist. Right? AI can do that for you.
Yes.
You don't want a poor patient from a tier 3 city coming to AIIMS Delhi, hanging around that complex for 3 days to get one appointment.
True.
And then get a 5-minute appointment with the doctor who will say, no, you're perfectly fine. Right? Only things that need critical care then get filtered. Right? Those kind of things can solve our medical problems at scale.
Yes.
Right? Like, you have a first level of diagnosis happening, what's the filtering. And I'm not saying replace doctors, but you can really become force multiplier. See, I think I don't want to endorse any brand, but the way to look at AI, the best way to look at AI is as a co-pilot.
Yes.
Co-pilot for governance, co-pilot for doctors, co-pilot for journalism, all of that, right? Look at it as a co-pilot, and then I think we have the right answers.
That's actually really insightful to look at it as a force multiplier and to figure out problems that need that force multiplier because of our infrastructure constraints, right? And try and solve that with AI. So my last question to you is, and this is something I like to ask everyone, is what is your own information diet and how do you regulate it just to be balanced, just to have a balanced perspective on the world?
Yeah. So I start my day by reading the Express, right? But jokes apart, I'm not really good at it because you end up consuming a lot of content that is maybe needless.
Yes.
Especially now with Reels, and I'm also I think you're doing something very serious. You're really focused on it. Ting, you get a notification. Somebody send you a reel. You tap on it, and then you realize 30 minutes is gone. You've been swiping through Reels.
True.
And you have. See, the problem with that kind of content is there is no takeaway from it.
Exactly.
Right? It's just if you ever been in a train, a long distance train, which I used to use a lot, there's people coming and saying time pass. It's just time pass. Right?
Yes.
Your time has passed because then you are on a train which is going to take 48 hours to reach your destination. You want to pass time.
True.
Here you don't have time, so this has become a distraction, right?
True.
So how do you focus on content that is good for you becomes very tough.
Yes.
Very, very tough because there is a proliferation of content, right? Of good content also, right? Earlier, I was thinking about this recently, when you heard a new concept, let's say when I was in college, you would figure out that next time I go to the library, I will look for a book that will give me this, more insight into this thing.
Yes.
This is early days of the internet. To open one page, you have to wait for an hour. So of course we had internet. I could go to a friend's house where you would do a dial-up connection and you would listen to all these crazy noises and the page would load pixel by pixel.
Yes.
Right. You could actually go, have a tea and come back and see the page is still only half loaded, especially if you're trying to load a picture. Right. So those kind of things. So, now it's become there are 100 podcasts I want to listen to. I end up listening to the same podcast. Again and again because that's finally I know okay this is the and maybe you expand your thing a little bit. There are maybe 100 news sources I want to read to. I end up reading only those 3-4 news sources that I really trust.
Yes.
Right. Look at your phone. I have 500 plus apps on my phone, but I end up using maybe the same 5 or 10 apps.
True.
Every single day. And I can't even remember that, okay, I see an app, okay, when did I download it? Why did I download it? What does it do? I don't remember. Right? I used to write an app column. when I started out, like when apps were really new, I used to introduce people to new apps that really blew my mind. So I have this habit, every time I see a new app, I'll download it. So I keep adding apps. Now I keep removing apps. I don't know what is the use of this, right?
Yes.
So I'm not really good at it. Again, that's maybe a great problem to solve.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of smartphone companies are trying to do it by saying that focus, just give you whatever. But understanding what is your information need and filtering, content that is great for you to consume is maybe a great product to do.
Yeah. And so, is that how you would advise your 13-year-old kid to, like, when he goes up in the future, what is the general advice you would give them on how to consume content, how to look at it, how to not be swayed by it too much? What is the last, takeaway we can keep from that, from a person who produces so much content?
So I don't think my 13-year-old wants my advice on anything. But again, this is it, because I used to take this session for school kids and college kids, So I always give this example that don't let the algo dictate anything, right? Because we are now smart enough to understand there is an algorithm working in the background, right? Maybe 10 years back we were not.
True.
Right? And we are living with the repercussions of that. I don't want to name anything, but there are enough repercussions of that we're living with, right? So an algorithm is going to work. Try and game the algorithm. So how does that work? Consume content you would otherwise not consume. Right? Look for sources just to give you the other perspective. Don't let the algorithm put you inside a bubble. Right? So a few years back when I used to go to colleges to talk about this in a session, I used to say, if you're an Amir Khan fan, ensure that once in a while you watch a Salman Khan movie. Just to confuse the algorithm.
True.
Right?
True.
Because otherwise, 6 months down the line, you will think Amir Khan is the only thing available in the world. Because the algorithm will take you into the Amir Khan vortex, right?
Yes.
You will get only Amir Khan. Because that is something that you have to fight against. It is like swimming against the stream. Tough to do, but that is what you should do. And again, at a larger perspective, be open to other opinions. Right? Be open to other perspective. Be open to people who would have a very different opinion than yours. Have those conversations. It is fine. It opens your mind. It gives you perspective. You don't have to agree. But listen in. There are people who have come from a slightly different context than yours. They don't need to understand things the way you want them to understand. Like, whenever I do a tech review, whenever I get a lot of negative feedback also, right? See, I can't write the review you want to read. Right? Because I will give that review with my perspective. I'm going to say this is good or bad because of my perspective. Right? So please understand there is always the other side. You can't force the world to walk behind you in the queue. Right? So this is generally what not that I've had this conversation with my 13-year-old, but this generally how I would say from a tech perspective, tech is dictating a lot of things you don't even realize.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Even what physical road you take for going from point A to point B.
Yes.
Often your mind tells you this is a better road, but the maps is telling you go this way, you will save 2 minutes, and you take that road and end up in end up inside a river, maybe. Right? But because tech is dictating so many things, it's made life so easy for us. So many things it's opened up. Right? Just look at knowledge, access to so much knowledge. Right? Unbelievable as in unthinkable 10-20 years back. Right? You have access to all the things. You showed me your Kindle. Right?
Yeah.
Any book in the world literally can read sitting wherever you are. Right? But try and game the algorithm instead of becoming a slave of the algorithm.
That's actually brilliant advice that we would all do well to, take to heart and actually follow. To piggyback off his advice, what I do and how I learned AI, sir, what I did was I opened a new account, a blank account.
Yeah.
And I only followed high signal AI people.
Yeah.
researchers at labs.
Sure.
And so then my algorithm just automatically tells me the latest AI news. Nothing, no fluff, nothing else, right? And so I have 5 accounts in each one for something that I want to learn. And so that's to your point, that's actually super useful. And I just want to thank you for having this conversation. It's been an absolute honor. It's super interesting. And I want to thank you so much.
Absolutely my pleasure, because I also got to exercise my brain a little bit. So thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you.